Practical exercises? That should be easy.
4 hours later.
Hello everyone, welcome to GOAT. My name is Jeremy, so nice of you to join us. Today we're going to learn how to copy data in Excel using VBA. Now that sounds pretty easy, but it's actually quite difficult. We're going to take it step by step though and learn a lot in the process, so let's go. Because of the difficulty of this, we need to use Pseudo Code to get our thoughts in order. So here's our goal. We want to copy a range of data to either a user entered destination on the same worksheet or copy it to the clipboard. But we need to play the what if game to anticipate problems. So what if the user didn't select a range? What if their entered destination isn't valid? What if they entered a destination but it's not empty? Do we overwrite or ask them, etc.? So here's the basic logic flow, and let's just get started with this first one, which is to get a valid selection or a range. And we need to halt if they did not get a range. The first function we'll use is something I call SelectionType, which is going to return a string value of what the user has selected. So here we can see the code, and it's very simple. We've just made a public function SelectionType. I put the $sign at the end. That's the same as string, so it's going to return text. I'll show you it working in action. So here, like for instance, I've selected a chart, and if I do question mark SelectionType, which is the same as debug print SelectionType, it's going to say we have a chart area selected. Same if I have a button. I have a button selected, and then now I'm going to do a range, SelectionType range. So we need to make sure the first part of our logical step is that they have a valid range selection. So now let's look at the second step of our logic flow, which is to halt if the selection is empty. There are several ways to do this, but I thought this was the best. I made myself a public function, rngContents, which again returns a string value, and I pass this function as an argument a range. Now I declare some variables. These are long variables, rows, columns, R and C, and then I have a couple of booleans, has data, has formula, and then the result is a string. And so the idea behind it is I pass a range to this function, it scans it, and if it's empty, it comes back with empty range. If there's something in the range, whether it's data or it's a formula for a cell, then it will show either one or both of those items. So let's just run through the code very quickly. So range contents, here are my variables. So first I initialize my rows to the range's row count. I initialize my columns to the range's column count. These are both properties for the columns collection and the rows collection for the past range. And then I initialize this function to equal empty range. Now what I do is I do a nested loop for the rows, basically 1 to the max rows, and C, 1 to the max columns. I'm going through the grid, whether it's 1 by 1 or 50 by 50. And then I look at the cell. So I look at the past range cells RC. If it's not equal to double quote, then I set the Boolean has data equal true. And if the cell formula is not equal to double quote, then the cell has a formula. So after I've done that loop through the range, I look at B has data and B has formula. If both of those are false, then I exit the function because I've already initialized range contents to empty range, so I can just stop here. If either one of these is true, then I compile what the result looks like. So the result, if it has data, I put range has data in a VBCR, double quote. Now this is called an immediate if. So this is what happens if that immediate if is true. So if B has data, this is the shorthand of saying if B has data equals true. You can just say if B has data. So this is the true condition. This is the false condition. Then S result equals S result, and then I append, then I look at B has formula. If has formula has been flagged as true, then I append range has formula. Otherwise I append blank, and I set the output of this function equal to S results. The next function we'll use is to determine whether a passed text value is a legitimate range. So here we are, public function textIsRange. Now this is a Boolean. We pass it a worksheet and then a text value, which may or may not be a range. So we have to test for that. Now the onError handler here is very important. So we make ourselves a range, and then we attempt to set that range equal to that worksheet range ptext. If it fails, then this becomes false. If it does not fail, then this is true. The next function is called ToggleXLAlerts. Now this lets us disable overwrite warnings in Excel, and there's actually two settings we have to modify. So what this does is this gets passed a Boolean to whether enable or disable those alerts. We always want to enable the alerts at the end of the code, but we also want to disable them if the user has manually chosen to overwrite a range. So we're going to pass it one required variable of a Boolean and two optional. And this looks a little confusing, but here are the comments to see how it runs. So basically the first time we call this, we would just set a variable, a Boolean variable in our main sub, Boolean equals ToggleXLAlerts, and then false. We would pass it false. And so we would then record what the original setting is of this right here. This is the user setting for alert before overwriting. That B alerts in code would equal this, and then we're going to disable this because we've passed false, basically. At the end of the code, we would just debug.print this again, and then pass it our original variable that we set. And I know this is kind of confusing, but you'll see it happen in code. So before we dive into the code of how this worksheet works, I'm going to show you how it works. So here we have a notional range that we want to copy, and we want to copy it to either a destination that we indicate, or we want to just copy it to the clipboard, much like hitting Control-C. See the dancing snakes here? And here's the button that will activate that. So first, if I have an empty selection, you have no data selected. If I have a chart or something that is not a range, no valid range selected. Now, if I highlight this and I hit copy, you'll notice the dancing snakes, and then I can go anywhere else, Control-V, and then I get my copy. However, I can also tell the code I want it to go to a particular location. So let's put in a range J1. Now what happens if I hit copy? It copies that data over. But we have to play the what if game. What if that is not a valid range in here and I do something like apples or applies, and then I try to do that? Your destination is not a valid range. What if it is a valid range but there's data already there? So let's do this. We'll copy, and then we'll try to copy again. I'm going to get a warning, and the range has data and the range has formula. Do I overwrite? Yes, we'll overwrite. No, we'll halt the process. So now the first part of the code, when we click that button on that sheet, we immediately test if selection type does not equal range. Then we do error.raise, which is basically induces an error in VBA and makes us go to error handler because we have our error handler flag at the top. So again, if you want to remember what this is, you can double click this, right click, and go to definition, and that was our selection type function. So it's going to return text of what we have selected. If I hit right click, last position, I'm back to my code. So that's the first thing we need to check, is whether they actually have a range selected. The next part of our code, now that we've tested whether they have a valid selection of range, is we give ourselves some variables. We have a range destination, a range selection, WS for our worksheet, and then we have a couple of string variables. Destination has the string. Remember, the user can possibly put in a valid destination, and the attempt result. So first we set our worksheet equal to the active sheet of the active workbook, and then we set rselect equal to application.selection. Now we can safely do this because we tested for that up here. We know that selection type is range, so we can now safely set rselect equal to that selection. Now that we have our range variable set to their selection, we need to test whether it's empty or not, because there's no point in copying an empty range. So here's where our rngContents function comes in. Again, if you forget what it does, you can double click, right click it, go to definition. This is the thing that loops through the grid. It initializes to empty range, but if it finds anything, it's going to set one or more flags to where it's not empty range. So let's right click, last position. So if rngContents equals empty range, then we need to raise an error because they've selected an empty range to copy, and we're just going to flag that and stop. Now that we've checked to see that our range is not empty, we're going to set a possible desired destination equal to the worksheet I-12. We could easily ask the user for input with an input box, but for now, we're just setting it to this, which is J1 currently. Now, if that S destination is not blank, so the user has indicated they want a range to copy to, we need to make sure that is a valid range. So if S destination is not equal to blank, we need to say, if not textIsRange, then we're going to raise an error. And again, let's look at what textIsRange. This simply attempts to set that range that was passed to it the text that was passed to it as a range, If it fails, then this ends up being false. If there is no error number, then this ends up being true, and it was a valid range. So if it's not a valid range, it'll stop right here. If it is a valid range and there was no error, then we're going to set the range destination equal to WS range, that text field. Now then, we need to check whether range destination was actually set. So if range destination is nothing, that means they had no destination. We just do a range select.copy. That puts your dancing, marching ants around the range, and it doesn't automatically copy it anywhere. If range destination is something, so they're trying to push this copy to a destination, we need to set our attempt result string, which is a string, equal to copy range data, and we're passing it the select range and the destination range. Now we'll jump to this sub in a minute. That's yet another sub that actually tries the copy operation. So let's jump to copy range data's definition and we'll take a look at it. This looks very scary, but it's not. So at the top, I put a comment that it depends on ToggleXLAlerts and rngContents. So this is going to return a string to tell us what the attempt result was. So we are going to pass it a source range and a destination range. So first, we're going to give ourselves a variable beAlert as Boolean and rngContents as a string. beAlert is going to equal to, we're going to call ToggleXLAlerts and we're going to disable alerts. Now remember, ToggleXLAlerts returns what the user's setting is for alert before overriding. So we're going to set that beAlerts variable equal to what the user currently has because we don't want to lose their setting. But then ToggleAlerts is going to disable display alerts because we've passed false for this first variable. So let's go back. Now we're going to set sRangeContents equal to the range contents of the P source. So remember, this returns whether it's an empty range or whether there's data or a formula in there. So we're going to set the range contents equal to, it's going to scan the range of the source, and if it's an empty range, then we have an empty source. Now we go ahead and set that string variable equal to range contents but the destination range. Now we want to check whether the destination is empty. Now if the range contents, which is up here, is not empty range, then we need to give the user a message box whether they want to overwrite. So this is pretty simple. I know it looks messy, but its destination is not empty. Then we basically hit enter twice. Then the results of range contents, which remember was either it'll show that it has data or formula or both, and then it's going to ask them overwrite. Now 260 is shorthand for VB yes no plus VB default button 2. That's just the shorthand for that. Confirm overwrite. So if they don't want to overwrite the range that has data in it, it will just raise an error and stop. Otherwise, at the very end of this, we pull a range, the source range dot copy, and then we can pass it the destination range to copy that range over. Now we're back in our main code. This is where we clicked the button. So again, we've checked the destination, whether the user indicated destination, whether it's empty. If they have not given us a destination, we're just going to do a range select.copy. That's our source range. Otherwise, they want to copy it somewhere, so we're going to attempt it using copy range data, and we're going to pass it both the selection range and the destination range. Now, if that attempt does not equal blank, then that means there was an error. Finally, at the end of our code, we have our error handler that gives us a message box for a quadruple 9. The reason we use triple 9 on copy range data is because it will already give a pop-up message to the user. So we don't want to hit them with 2 pop-up messages. Then if I have any objects set, I set them equal to nothing, and that's it. Now I realize this may seem quite intimidating, but take it one step at a time. I've also drafted up a logic flow so you can see what's happening logically as we step through the code. So I'm going to walk you through this logic flow. While it's not exactly following the code, it's pretty close. So first we started with checking our selection to make sure the user had even selected a range. And here's the name of the function. Did it equal range? Nope. We halt. If it was a range, then we have set variable rselect equal to that range. Now then, we check the contents of rselect. Were they empty? Yes, we halt. There's no point in trying to copy an empty range. Then we continue on if no, the contents are not empty. Now then, we check, did the user enter a desired destination text, which is string destination? If there was no destination present, then we just do an rselect copy and we halt the program there. If there was a destination, we have to check whether that's a legitimate range, so we use textIsRange. If that was not a legitimate range, we halt. If it was, we set rdest. Now we pass both rSelect and rDest to copy range data, which is a subroutine. First, we toggle ToggleXLAlerts and make them false. Now we check the destination contents. Are they empty? If they are empty, we perform a range select copy, we pass it the destination, and then we turn the alerts back on and we end. If the destination is not empty that we're attempting to copy to, we ask the user, do you want to overwrite? If they say yes, we continue with the copy. If they say no, we end out with ToggleXLAlerts back to what they were, and then end the execution. The important thing to do is to practice, 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 and also realize, believe it or not, it is harder to code for Excel VBA than Access VBA. Yep, I said it. Now you may be wondering why use this instead of just Control-C and Control-V. Well, because we can expand upon this code and do some very cool automated things. You have to also realize that about 90% of my coding and coding in general, a lot of it is just error correction to make sure that there are no errors in the code. And since Excel is so unstructured and is almost like a blank canvas, we have to do a lot of error checking before we attempt to perform operations. The other good thing to remember is that these functions are basically universal, so you can use them over and over again. Yeah, we'll have to repeat the code for the button itself, but all the other functions of checking whether something is a range, checking whether it's empty, etc., can be reused everywhere. Now, if this is too complex to you, don't worry. I'm actually going to follow this up with a very short video on a much more simplified version. But you must understand the simplified version won't really be that useful because we have to do all these error checks. However, a super simple version may help you get started on how this works at a much simpler level. So stay tuned.